Morning to you, Philip.
Good morning, Cristo.
So is this a fair analysis that of Zelensky that, well, firstly, I think this is a huge story that barely has been touched in the last 24 hours because of various other events. But now Zelensky saying he's actually happy, well, not happy, but prepared to cede land to Putin, not been said before. Secondly, of course, this is ahead of Trump in January, inevitably next month, saying something similar in order to bring this conflict to an end.
Oh, you've got it spot on. You know, this is President Zelensky playing the new Trump team, knowing that the new Trump team has spoken to Vladimir Putin. Putin denies that a conversation ever happened, and spoken to Zelensky, and effectively he's trying to smash their heads together and say, you know, I promised the electorate that I will stop this war in 24 hours. You two better start talking. So they're setting out their conditions for talking. Now, Zelensky has said that he would see ceding temporarily some of the ground that Russia has got to end the hot phase of the war, provided that Ukraine is given guarantees by NATO, and I think implies NATO membership as part of that for the rest of Ukraine, so that he can then negotiate getting that territory back again in the future. He knows perfectly well that that is completely unacceptable to Vladimir Putin, but Putin will not give any ground whatsoever. So Trump is going to be put in this position where, you know, Zelensky is playing the Trump game, Putin isn't playing the Trump game, and he's going to have to decide who to support most.
Put in this position. Sorry. Okay, so that was a good one. But isn't that kind of the perfect compromise? Because if the land was just ceded to Putin, then it does give a message to the rest of the world that if you carry out an act like this, you will end up with some land. Maybe not all the land that you want, but you do end up with some land. But it also gives the win to Putin that he needs so that he can go back to the Russian people with. But also, it's not such a win because Ukraine would end up with formal NATO membership, which might put off any future moves by Putin for anywhere else. So it does appear to be, perhaps, enough of a win for both that they can have their heads held high.
One of Putin's red lines, and this is one that he probably would not let be crossed, is Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. And the lack of permanency of ceding the territory, again, is something that Putin wouldn't agree to. Now, I think there's a compromise that hasn't come out here. You're trying to second guess what any negotiations would be. You know, if the eastern part of Ukraine was given back to Ukraine, Russian forces withdrew from there, and there was a deal done over Crimea, where Crimea was potentially put in as a United Nations international protectorate, where it wasn't the Russian government or the Ukrainian government had control over it. That could be something, and there has been precedent set in the past for that sort of thing to come in. But we're a long way off. This is Zelensky playing a game, saying to Trump, I'm willing to negotiate, I'm willing to compromise here, knowing full well that Putin will go, yes, my compromise is I want to take more. And will not cede anything that he's got, knowing full well that Trump will then have to turn around and back Zelensky to smack smack Putin for not doing things. And we remember, Putin's response to the initial phone call that came from Trump's team was to deny that it happened, but then as soon as he denied that it happened, he put naked pictures of Melania Trump all over Russian national television for a period of time. That's what an old Russian spy would be doing to threaten someone. So there's a lot of work going on, or there's a big game going on behind closed doors, behind the scenes, that we're not really seeing.
Okay, let's move on to Syria. Early this morning, we heard Russia carrying out series of airstrikes in Syria as rebels advanced towards the south. This is after we saw a withdrawal of Assad forces in Aleppo due to this surprise assault from rebels. So can you give us an explainer of exactly what's going on there and what this will mean?
Okay, well, civil war in Syria, very quickly, began 2011 after the Assad government responded to pro-democracy protests, and he had a brutal crackdown. The conflict has been largely dormant with a ceasefire that was agreed in 2020, with the rebels holding or being dominant in the north around the city of Idlib. But then all of a sudden, in the last few days, we've seen this rebel group led by a group called the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, which is much easier to use, who were Al-Qaeda affiliated, are one of the more stronger rebel groups, but have brought together lots of others, have launched this surprise attack down into the south, and allegedly have taken control of Aleppo and are pushing into, which is Syria's second largest city, and are pushing into other cities further south, heading towards Damascus. Russia came in on the side of Assad to help him, primarily providing air power and air cover. So it's the Russian Air Force that are in. And this is why we're getting reports of the Russian Air Force bombing places in Aleppo. Now, they don't have precision weapons, so they will be taking out complete blocks of areas if they think that there are rebels in there. And the people that are suffering most are the civilians who, before the ceasefire was signed in 2020, had suffered horribly in Aleppo.
And of course, with this uneasy peace that has been there as well, a surprise to many of those people.
It has, and you have to ask the question, why have the HTS decided to do this now? I think there's a number of reasons. I think Assad is in a weaker position. He was relying on Russian support. He was relying on support from Lebanese Hezbollah as well. And we've seen the pressures that are under the Russians and Russian military capability because of them not doing particularly well in Ukraine. And then Hezbollah has effectively been decapitated by the Israelis and are being pinned down by the Israelis in southern Lebanon. So the support into Syria was very much weakened, and this is an opportunist attack in that is achieving an awful lot more than I think the HTS would have hoped for, and has got the potential, but it's too early to say how far it's going to go, but it's got the potential to topple the Assad government.
OK, let's talk about one of the front pages this morning. MOD orders £37 million of kit from China. This is being kitted out and clothed, apparently, by China. Express saying that this morning, and the kinds of kit is 60,000 individual units of combat kit being manufactured in China, flight overalls, fire retardant overalls from Navy ships for sailors, and all sorts of other bits of equipment. One of the ironies, of course, would be that one of the Navy ships which would end up with this equipment from China and the overalls being worn by the sailors is actually the HMS Prince of Wales, which is actually in South China Sea next year, sort of looking after Western interests, which seems bizarre. Obviously, there's a potential security threat with this, but also it is giving a lot of money to the economy of China, which, of course, some are saying that is a bit of a threat.
I think this has been blown up slightly out of proportion in what's going on. The contracts are actually let to UK companies and Spanish companies. The UK company's based in Northern Ireland. I know the company very well indeed. And it looks as if they've sublet their contracting out. Some of the detail in the article which I've read, where it says that the Special Forces kit has got special coatings to reduce the radar reflectiveness of the combat clothing. No, you can't reduce the radar reflectiveness of combat clothing. It's probably infrared reflectiveness in going on. But I think we would be gobsmacked at the number of the number of components and elements if we audited everything that the Ministry of Defence has got and every other government department's got, where elements are manufactured in China. So the money's going to UK and Spanish companies. They're subcontracting it out. It isn't a security risk in any way, shape or form, but I think it is a wake-up to the government where they need to look at where contractors subcontract work out, and that subcontracted work shouldn't go to the likes of China or elsewhere. There are plenty of other countries around the world that can provide relatively cheap manufacturing capability to the standards that we need, and we don't have to keep going and relying on China.
OK, final story, and this is another interesting one. Actually, it's about Putin. Britain was warned of Russian meddling in the Chagos Island deal that we've done with Mauritius. Now, of course, this is back in the headlines over the last couple of weeks because, of course, there's a lot of talk that Donald Trump will try and reverse this deal for us to give back the Chagos Islands. Well, give the Chagos Islands, not necessarily give back, because I don't think they were ever under Mauritian control, but because of various areas and history of population and the like, they have now been given to Mauritius, but leased back to us. And, of course, there is an American base on the Chagos Islands, which is why Trump is particularly not very happy about it. Now there's a story about Russian meddling, because apparently it was the Russians that were trying to back Mauritius in trying to get these islands.
Yes, this is one of the craziest decisions from a government that didn't need to be made, and why they're pushing it through in the timelines that they are, I really don't know. You're right, Mauritius has never owned the Chagos Islands. The important bit about the Chagos Islands is Diego Garcia, which has got a large US airbase on it, and it's also used for intelligence gathering and other things. The islands have always been under British control, even whenever there was historically, back in 1871, was when the French ceded them to the British, and then Mauritius was part of that ceding. The Chagos Islands were split out from Mauritius, and Mauritius gained its independence in 1968. The trigger for this has been an international Court of Justice advisory that the Chagos Islands should be given to Mauritius. There was no logic behind that whatsoever, and it was an advisory notice. It's not compulsory in any way, shape or form. That came in a few years ago. Conservative government started to negotiate it, but kicked it into the long grass, and for some reason or other, Keir Starmer's government has implemented it very quickly indeed. During that time, we've seen President Trump being re-elected, and he'll be sworn in January, and the Prime Minister of Mauritius has changed as well, and therefore, you know, the situation has changed completely. It'll be interesting to see where this goes.
What do you think is going to happen?
It's really difficult to guess. It depends on how much political effort that Keir Starmer puts into trying to push this through, but there is no logic behind it whatsoever. And what he's going to do, if he does push it through, is really upset the Trump administration as they come in. If I were he, I would just let it quietly disappear, and the deal just to fall apart, because anything else is likely to harm UK relations with America for quite a long time. You know, the deal saw Diego Garcia being leased back to the UK, guaranteeing US presence for 99 years. In a military base terms, 99 years is nothing. And Russia will have seen all of this, will have been stirring the pot behind closed doors. But it's not just Russia. China will be stirring the pot as well, because this is in their backyard. You know,
and also, from what I understand, you may well correct me on this, but because the island the base is just on one of those islands, yep, it leaves the rest of the islands nearby to the base up for grabs to be leased or used by China and other countries if they wish to, which there's no guarantee that wouldn't happen, which would thereby make the base that is occupying the island nearby essentially useless.
Yeah, we're seeing China weaponizing islands through the whole of the South China Seas and elsewhere, in particular around the Paracel and Spratly Islands. And what they're doing is they're going in and they're creating artificial islands, which then under international maritime law have got a legal 12-mile zone that will be owned by China around it, and 200-mile economic zone around there. China will come in, or possibly Russia will come in and create new artificial islands in the area quite easily, so that it can threaten operations out of Diego Garcia. This is happening elsewhere in the area, and this is why I think we should be extremely concerned about the decision to hand these islands over. I do hope it's reversed.
All right, really good to talk to you. Thank you. That's Philip Ingram, former senior military intelligence officer. When we